to The Long Way Round. I'm your host, Malcolm Byrne, here on Radio Kingston, WKNY, 1490 AM, 107.9 FM, and of course on the internets at radiokingston.org. And special thank you, as always, to Tiokasin Ghost Horse for an excellent program. Dr. Manuel Rosenthal is a brave and fearless voice of freedom and justice for Indigenous people the world over, as is Tiokasin. So I thank you for that. This week I have a very special guest standing by, and without further ado, I'm going to introduce a rising star of the internet. Saw you on television the other night, Jackson Hinkle. Jackson, how are you doing, brother?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on.
It's really an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show, and congratulations on a couple of different things. Your appearance on good old Tucker Carlson the other night, I think you nailed it pretty well, and the very, you only get like 20 seconds to say your thing on that show, but you did well. Did you script that, or was that off the top of your head, or?
Yeah, usually whenever I'm going like on a bigger TV show, I usually talk to a friend before I go on and get some advice on, I call up a friend that I trust and I'll say, I'm thinking about saying these sorts of things. And it's good to get a friend's advice before you go out to 5 million people and just say what's on the top of your head. So I did that. And I had some pre-planned things, but yeah, you're right. It's like 2 minutes, I think you get. And just try to fit in as much impactful stuff that you can in that brief period of time.
Well, we'll go over some of those points, but obviously we have a little more time to explore that. And and my other question for you is, did they send a limo for you, or what? Because I saw your
they send it was a Lincoln. They had a Lincoln for me pull up, which was nice because my car does not have. I don't know. Living in LA, you just really don't need a car like downtown LA. So I've lived in LA for like a year and a half now, maybe. And the whole time I've lived here, I've been like, I'm going to get a new car. And I've just never gotten a new car. And that would have been a nightmare to have to drive like 40 minutes with no air conditioning and then show up to the studio all sweaty right before I go on. That would not. So they sent a Lincoln over. It was nice.
And I'm just interested in this stuff because a couple of weeks ago I had, I'm sure you're aware of Garland Nixon. Do you know Garland?
Mm-hmm.
You talked to him.
Yeah.
And he's done in over the years, he's been on everything, Fox News, ABC, NBC, MSNBC, and everything else. And he always kind of, he kind of yucks it up a little bit, because it's, it's like you get the black tie treatment and it's like, okay, get out of here, kid. So,
yeah.
But, and also, I understand it's your birthday coming up soon.
It is.
Is that right?
It is September. So Thursday, I think September 15th.
And you're going to be
soon.
You're going to be. Wow, you're turning
23.
You're an old man now.
I know. I was supposed to play basketball this morning with some of my friends who go to USC, and I was like, I can't play this morning. My back hurts. My back hurts.
Wait,
it's already hitting.
You got a few years ahead of you, my friend. But well, that's fantastic, and it's incredible. I mean, I've been aware of you. I mean, if you wouldn't mind, because I didn't get your bio organized and stuff like that, but just for people in the audience who are not aware of you yet, who will be after this show, just give me a little bit of your background. I know you've got a rather interesting background, and I'd love to share that.
Yeah, well, it's a short but diverse background, I guess, because I'm only 22, and I got initially involved in local politics when I was 17, and I started like an environmental group in my hometown, and I grew up just as a surfer. Like that's all I really did. I surfer and played basketball, and that's what I loved, playing music too. And there was just like so much pollution in our oceans, and I didn't know too much about like environmental issues at the time, or I wasn't well versed in any of that stuff, but I just wanted to make our beaches cleaner, considering that's where I spent a great deal of my time. Mm-hmm. So I started an environmental club when I was in high school, and out of that kind of came everything that I have today and that I've built into and the worldview I have. Although I would say that my hardcore environmentalist views, and many of my views have shifted since I was 17 in either small or large parts. And I think most people can probably relate to that. They don't hold the same positions they did when they were 17 on, political issues and some of the biggest ones in the world. But when I was 17, I started that group and we got some really big things accomplished. We got I think it was an $8 million solar panel project across our school district. We got plastic water bottles banned from 70 different schools in our school district because those were ending up on the beaches and stuff. And then out of that, I started to get really involved in nuclear waste issues because there was a nuclear power plant in my community. Orange County, California is where I grew up, in San Clemente. And that nuclear power plant, it had a radioactive leak back in 2012. It shut down, was going through decommissioning. But regardless what people think about nuclear power, there's a debate there as to whether or not it merits being, reinvested in and kind of taken up again as a public national task. But nuclear waste is an issue that in the United States, more particularly, we can't seem to wrap our heads around. And a lot of this is due to corporate infiltration of the regulatory agencies. So I got really involved in nuclear waste issues because the largest nuclear waste repository was in my hometown in San Clemente, 108 feet away from the shoreline at my local beach. And I started to get really involved. I went and briefed members of Congress on this issue. I briefed presidential candidates, Tulsi Gabbard on this issue, Bernie Sanders on this issue. And after that, I got more into climate related issues. I was on Nancy Pelosi's youth council with 10 other kids and across the nation, and I'd have monthly meetings with her. And after that, I ran for city council in my hometown, and I was 18 when I ran the first time, 19 when I ran the second time. The second time I got second place. I came really close. I thought I was going to win. And then I just started to read a lot. I kind of worked in private sector jobs for a few years. And then I started my own YouTube channel, and that's what I do today. And my YouTube channel initially focused on a lot of, domestic culture issues. Now it's primarily focused on geopolitical events and also touches a lot on domestic political stuff. But right now, with everything happening in Russia and Ukraine and China and the EU and BRICS, all these sorts of things, it's just so fascinating to me. And that's where I've found myself. So it's a long, road of many ups and downs in just a few years, but that's where I'm at now.
Well, it's been really incredible to watch your popularity rise, and I know that you've been demonetized a number of times. How many times have you had to create a new YouTube channel in the last 6 months?
Yeah, no, it's crazy. I've been demonetized by YouTube, permanently banned by Venmo and PayPal, which are, apps that people use to send money, donations to a show if they like them. I've been banned by 2 different stores online stores where I sold my merchandise for my show. And I've been suspended from Twitter multiple times, suspended from Discord. I'm sure there's more that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. But I've found that if you speak a message that goes against what the warmongers in Washington, D.C. are preaching, they will do just about anything and everything to silence you if you're reaching a lot of people.
Yeah, we have a couple of mutual friends, Alex Christoforou and Alexander Mercouris were my guests a couple of months ago, and they're incredible guys. They seem to be. They're very careful. Whenever I watch Alex's, you've seen him how he walks around.
Yeah.
I think he's in Nicosia somewhere in Cyprus right now. But
they're great. They're so great. I watch them every day. But actually, I think I'm having them on my show next week. I'm looking forward to that. They're just walking encyclopedias. Well,
especially Alexander. They're both amazing, but Alexander specifically has got they don't call him the Oracle for nothing. He's just so knowledgeable, but they have to be also quite careful about the language.
Yeah.
I noticed that Alex, he refers to Zelensky as Elensky. He doesn't use the word Nazi. He uses
Yes.
He has to be very careful and I think he did get shut down for about a week, maybe 2 or 3 months ago. But there's that constant struggle, isn't there, to sort of work your way around that. And
it's tough. It's like so the way YouTube works, not only can they just permanently demonetize you, which is something I didn't know happen often, and actually doesn't happen often. I only know two other people who've been permanently demonetized on YouTube that are like active YouTubers. But if they give you, so they have community guideline strikes, and that's what you're referring to when Alex got a 7-day ban a couple months ago. If you get 3 of those community guideline strikes, your YouTube gets permanently nuked. Like they completely remove all the content. You're permanently banned, can't start a new channel. And I have 2 of those right now. And one of them ends September 28th. So I'm just crossing my fingers I make it until September 28th and I can have some room to breathe. But you're right. You have to be so careful about what you talk about. I've kind of even taken a step back talking about day-to-day, infantry reports on the ground as to the war in Ukraine, because there's other things I can talk about, and talking about that in particular, day-by-day war situation on the ground, it draws a lot of eyes that want you to shut up and to not talk about what's actually happening.
Yeah, I mean, it is striking how few... last week, my guest was I don't know if you're familiar with John Pilger. He's a veteran journalist, been around,
amazing.
I think he covered 7 shooting wars in the last 60 years. And, he was saying last week that, we live like this particular conflict. And of course, we're going to devote some time to the situation in Ukraine because it's something that we're both interested in, I suppose is the word. It's the most in his words, the most propagandized conflict he's ever seen in his career in over 60 odd years. There's just so much propaganda and so much. It's amazing. Like, 'cause I don't know if you're familiar with people like, Brian Bertolek, right? From the new Atlas.
He's awesome.
But on the, there's even people like on the ground, like there's a guy named Patrick Lancaster. Are you familiar with Patrick?
Yes.
And it's incredible because you'll hear someone who's there saying one thing, and then I'll get it. I don't know why this junk shows up in my Google feed, but you get Newsweek with it. It's like 2 different realities. It reminds me of an episode of that show, The Black Mirror, that science fiction program on Netflix, where it's like, wait, there's like these 2 realities going on. Let's talk about that just a little bit.
Yeah, it's really crazy. The thing that I will say, though, is after covering the war for almost every day, I probably go live on my YouTube maybe 4 or 5 times a week, 4 times usually, and covering all of it, though they do paint the picture of what's going on in Ukraine with like a 180-degree flipped lens as to what's actually happening on the ground. I don't know if you've noticed this, but usually you can kind of read between the lines and understand what's really happening. The title of the story might say one thing, but usually, whether it's the Pentagon briefing of the day or the State Department briefing of the day, or the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times to a lesser extent, but you can look at these stories and you can kind of decipher what they're saying. If they're saying that there's like Russian shaping operations taking place in Mykolaiv, we all kind of know what that means. We know that means that they're in control of the situation there. They're going to be moving in soon. And you can look at that in a myriad of different ways that they talk about the war. It seems as though they use that coded language, yet only a few people really know what it means. And then you, of course, have like the completely delusional ones like Newsweek. Wall Street Journal does put out a lot of stuff where I just read it and I'm like, is this like Zelensky himself writing this? I don't know. It's crazy, but it's all for the morale boosters. And, they need a reason to justify sending more arms to Ukraine. And up until this week, they haven't had any real tangible, substantive wins that they could post on the scoreboard and say, hey, look, we finally scored some points. Please give us more arms now. Up until this point, it's all just been fabrications.
Just to cut to the chase on that subject, and then we'll go to a quick break. what's your take on the current status of the operations, specifically around Kharkiv? Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. There was that major Kharkiv offensive by the Ukrainians, and it appears as though, and based upon everyone that I've been listening to, because I just synthesize information, I'm not reporting directly on any of this stuff, but everyone that I've listened to basically has come to an agreement that A, this has been a major blunder on behalf of the Russians. B, they didn't have any substantial reinforcements in the Kharkiv region, and they were thinking about pulling out of the Kharkiv region for quite some time. And C, the level to which the Ukrainians moved into that region with tens of thousands of troops was the biggest indication of all that Russia was going to have to pull out. Now, the way in which they pulled out was, I think, as genius as they could have done in a situation like that. They not only they didn't try to establish any control between the north and the south of the offensive that Ukraine was launching when they were moving west. They pulled out of all of the Kharkiv region in its entirety, which in essence is going to spread the Ukrainian troops very thin across the entirety of the region and leave them with a propaganda piece that they can whip around and say, this is a decisive victory. And to a certain extent, yes, it is. But the question as to whether or not they would or will be able to maintain these positions if Russia tries to move back in is a whole nother question, because they're extremely exposed. But then again, this is a question of whether or not Russia even wants to permanently take that land and that territory right now. There's people saying within the Duma that maybe that's not the case, and they were actually planning on moving out of there eventually. But we'll see.
Well, I mean, to your point, I watched Alexander Mercouris's most recent post, which was probably just an hour or two ago, and he has completely come to the conclusion that, given the sort of orderliness of the Russian withdrawal, this is something that you don't just sort of suddenly see the bad guys coming over the hill and run away. I mean, this has been planned. So, I think there's some validity to that point. And I also feel that, going back to what Scott Ritter said when he was on the show a month or so ago, the one thing that the Ukrainians are winning is the PR war. I mean, but strategically, he hammers home this point over and over and over again. And Brian from the New Atlas has said this on various occasions. It's one thing to take ground, but it's another to maintain that. And
yes.
That's, okay, so you've got roughly 2,000 kilometers of territory that's been taken, which is, according to Patrick Lancaster, about a 24th of the territory that Russia occupies, which is not hugely significant in real terms. And also, I think, conservative estimates of Ukrainian losses are somewhere in the 2,000 to 3,000. Some people are saying 5,000 to 6,000. That's a lot of young lives for political gain, in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, but that's just the problem with the Ukrainian mindset in this war, is that they can just, not trying to be grim, but they can throw as many men through the meat grinder as they want because of the sheer number of troops that they have. And that's a harsh reality of war, but that's the truth in this situation. We'll see if they can amass any more troops. My estimate is that the lines that have been drawn right now, which are the Oskol River. The Russians have created a flank along the entirety of the Oskol River that they're protecting right now. The river's low, and it's somewhat easier to cross than it was a few months ago, but it is low. They have a pretty strong line there, and they have a strong line on the Seversky Donetsk River, and that connects in the south. We'll see if they can maintain this, but if the Ukrainians can send more troops over there before Russian reinforcements get to that region, it could become a bigger problem for the Russians than they initially anticipated. So we'll have to wait and see. It's very interesting, though.
Well, I mean, as has been shown over and over again, war is always full of surprises. There's no matter what you plan, and Scott talks about this all the time. You've got plan A, plan B, and plan C, and then something comes along and screws it all up, and you have to think the whole thing over again. But, I think that Yeah, it's a tough one, and it's so divisive. You know, it's the kind of thing that's pulling people apart. You know, I have friends that are really. I mean, even just yesterday, I was labeled a pro-Putin, anti-Ukraine, Trump fascist in one email. I mean, that's a lot of labeling for someone you haven't seen in 15 years to come to that conclusion just because I don't thoroughly endorse the Western narrative. So anyway, look, we'll just take a quick break and we'll be right back. Stay tuned for Jackson Hinkle. We'll be back.
Hi, I'm Tanisha.
And I'm Angelina.
We're from the Ulster County Resource Recovery Agency.
Did you know 40% of the food grown in America is never eaten? 90% of us throw away food before it's spoiled, and when food ends up in the landfill, it causes pollution.
Composting is one of the best things you could do for our planet, and it transforms our trash into treasure.
We're celebrating our 10-year composting anniversary. Over the past 10 years, we've composted over 47 million pounds of food scraps and created 22 million pounds of finished compost.
If this food were landfilled instead of recycled, it would take 679 long-haul trips, traveling over 320,000 miles to a landfill.
That's enough to drive around the surface of the earth 13 times.
You can be a climate leader too by rethinking wasteful habits and composting at home, school, or at work.
And we can help. Find us on social media at UCRRA or visit ucrra.org.
Radio Kingston.
Many voices.
Muchas voces.
Many voices.
One community.
Hi, it's Nick Pankin. Join me Tuesday nights at 9 for Freedom Highway. The arc of history is long and it's filled with song.
There are voices still calling across the years.
Humans have always used music to unify and amplify our struggles for freedom.
And now we got a revolution, 'cause I see the face of things to come.
Do you ever wonder where the protest songs of today are?
We take all we want from black culture, but will we show up for black lives?
We'll explore the roles that music plays in shaping the movements that aim to shape our world through interviews, conversation, and lots of great music. Freedom Highway, Tuesday nights at 9 here on Radio Kingston, AM 1490, FM 1079, or anytime at radiokingston.org.
And the Kingston Library and People's Place are teaming up once again for Lunch and Learning Reading Series, The School Experience, Thursdays in September. Each week, you'll read a selected piece of writing about a different aspect of the school experience and discuss it with your group. You can pick up and read the selections ahead of time or read them the day of. You'll get lunch at noon at People's Place Cafe, then head upstairs to the People's Place Wellness and Empowerment Center for the discussion group. Please note that the center is accessible by stairs only. Drop-ins are welcome, though registration is appreciated. Lunch and Learn, the school experience, Thursdays at noon through September at the People's Place Cafe and Wellness and Empowerment Center, 777 and 775 Broadway in Kingston. To register or for more information, peoplesplace.org. That's peoplesplace.org. And if you're just tuning in, this is A Long Way Round. I'm your host, Malcolm Byrne, and my guest tonight is none other than internet superstar Jackson Hinkle. How you doing, Jackson?
Good. How are you?
Great. And so, as I said to start off the show, I'm very excited to have you on the show because you're you've got such a clear head about this stuff. And you know, one thing I wanted to ask you, you'd mentioned that earlier in your life you'd been involved in. I'm going to guess that you were a Bernie person. Is this correct?
Yes.
So you were part of the 2016 Bernie for the People, as I was. So
yeah, that was kind of where I got my interest in national politics, was through that, and it just woke me up.
Where do you think things are at this stage in terms of, look, the way I look at it with Bernie is that he brought a lot of things to, not, by himself, but his campaign brought a lot of issues to the fore that were not really being discussed. I mean, even the word socialism was like, ooh, can't say that word on TV or you get, whatever. But, student debt, environmental issues, social, all of these things. But where do you think that it's been somewhat co-opted? How do you feel about where things are at?
Well, I think anyone has to look at the inherent successes of the Bernie Sanders campaign before we analyze where it's at today. And that was that. It was like the single largest grassroots donations campaign in American history. It came out of nowhere. He was a nobody senator for the most part. I mean, he was kind of known in more fringe political circles, but the guy ran as a Peace and Freedom Party candidate in, I believe, in Vermont several times. He ran 6 times, finally won a mayoral campaign on his 6th election by a span of like 10 votes. So he's always kind of been a political outsider, whatever. We know the story, but we have to recognize that to understand just how insane the Bernie Sanders campaign was. The fact that he overcame almost the most political, powerful machine and maybe all of Democratic Party history. Almost overcame the Clinton family if it weren't for them, interfering in the Democratic Party convention and the primary process, which has now been thoroughly exposed. But given how successful it was based upon the message that he put forward, it was only a matter of time before it was co-opted and weaponized and utilized by those in power who are protectorates of the warmongers and the corporate state and the deep state to try and, bring new people into their movement. And I think that's mostly focused on giving surface level handouts to people. Like you mentioned the student debt cancellation. Well, a lot of people are talking about that right now with Joe Biden. But the thing was, like, he only forgave $10,000 in student loan debt. I mean, that's going to do nothing. And sure, it impacted some people's lives. I know some people have been impacted by it. But at the end of the day, that's not that. When I say it's not going to change anything, I'm talking about systemic change. And that's what Bernie Sanders, in essence, we all thought presented a hope for systemic change. Now, he didn't do that. And one could argue that maybe he never was going to do that, or maybe you could argue that he was going to do that. I don't know. We'll never know. If you listen to people like Michael Parenti, they have some thoughts on this. He's a longtime friend of Bernie Sanders. And he, pretty much parted ways with Bernie Sanders after Bernie supported the NATO bombings of Yugoslavia. So there's a lot of things to be said about Bernie Sanders. But yeah, I think the movement is pretty much dead on arrival right now because of the fact that it's all been co-opted by the Democratic Party, not because they could have done this and they were successful in doing this, but because Bernie Sanders allowed it to happen. And maybe that was a plan, maybe it wasn't, who knows. But he definitely didn't put up a fight to try and start some sort of a movement of its own unto itself that challenged and actually rivaled the Democratic Party. He facilitated his movement back into the Democratic Party, and that's why it's now in shambles. So it's very disappointing because it was such a big movement of so many people. And who knows how it all would have worked out, because now there's so many disagreements among so many of these factions of the previous, Bernie left, that I don't know if we'll ever have the opportunity of uniting these people again. I mean, I wouldn't want to work with a lot of these people ever again. But then that also kind of begs the question, would it have ever worked from the start if he had gotten into office? I don't know. It's too much to think about and hypothesize about, but it definitely would have been interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in your critiques, of the left specifically, because, we know this has been said many, many times, but the issue with the left is it's always a bit like herding chickens. There's so many different factions, and getting a kind of a unified sense of commitment is quite difficult. But where do you see the left at this point? What's your critique, if you have one?
I have many critiques of the left today. I've had as I mentioned in the previous segment, I've had a complex political life, I guess you could say. My transitions have been many over the years. Started out as a liberal, then went into the Bernie Sanders left. Now I'm just I would say when it comes to social issues, I'm pretty centrist, and I view myself and I view the world from the lens of Marxism. Now, what's so interesting about that is today I ran a poll on my YouTube channel, and let me bring it up right here. It has 5,000 votes right now. And I was curious because I live stream every day and I talk for hours just like you do. I was thinking, I wonder what my audience views on the world are, because like I view the world from the lens of dialectical materialism. I believe in industrialization. I believe in this sort of stuff. I am in opposition to a lot of the things that I think the modern U.S. left, the Western left, embodies right now, which is degrowth, deindustrialization, hyper focus on cultural issues and a lack of focus on economic issues and fighting against the warmongers. And I was so interested. So my audience, and it'd be curious if you could do this with your audience. I don't know. It's so interesting. 26% of them claim to be MAGA, like Make America Great Again Trump supporters. 22% of them claim to be Marxist. 18% claim to be libertarian. And then 34% said something else, other. And I looked at that and I was like, that's a crazy line of stats there. The fact that you have so many self-proclaimed Marxists and so many self-proclaimed MAGA supporters that are uniting around a common vision of fighting against the deep state and fighting for the growth and prosperity of our economy, I think is a beautiful thing. And I think that's what so many on the quote unquote left today actually oppose. There's notable examples that sit in opposition to that and actually fight for what we believe in. Jimmy Dore's among them. In some cases, I think maybe Tulsi Gabbard might be one of those people on certain issues, but there's not many. There's not many. I think most of the left today has a tough time uprooting liberalism from their worldview. And that's why we see them supporting causes like blindly, such as Ukraine. And that's why we see them saying crazy things like Taiwan is a country. It always is expressed the most, I feel like, in their foreign policy outlooks. And that could be said about Bernie Sanders as well.
Matt Taibbi wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you read it on Substack, but he talked about what was the title of the piece? He talked about how the neoconservative movement, after the Iraq debacle, and that kind of sort of backfired and gave, the neoconservative movement a very bad name. They sort of went back to the drawing board and thought, look, how can we rebrand? And it's a fascinating, it's called the Kremlinization of something or other. And he talks about how the neoconservative movement sort of rebranded itself and sort of started to appeal to the, I don't mean this as a derogatory term, the social justice warrior aspect of people's, this idea that, and the manifestation, of course, is with Ukraine. Like, so many of my, quote, liberal friends are very supportive of Ukraine because they look at it, I call it the Samantha Powerization of the world.
I like that.
It's the sort of this moral, we have to do this. It started with Kosovo back in the 90s, and it's just progressed over and over. And it's just another way of promoting more what I call imperialist, neo-colonial, interventionist wars, except they've rebranded it to appeal to people like me or you or anybody else. I don't know if you know.
Yeah, there's a Moscow-based journalist. His name is Andrew Karibko. He's great. And he really dove into this yesterday on Twitter in the most succinct way I've ever heard it put. And it was because a former journalist of the Gray Zone, his name's Benjamin Norton, and he's someone who's I'd say he's more, of this leftist strain, more liberal strain than any sort of true anti-imperialist. He was coming after me because
I did see that, by the way.
You did see that, yeah. He was Benjamin Norton was coming after me because he claims that, I'm conservative and whatnot, and this is equivalent to fascism, and anyone who tries to unite MAGA voters, Trump voters, and Marxists to overcome the imperialists is therefore a fascist because they're working with MAGA voters. And I just thought it was so insane. And Andrew responded to it kind of in the same way that you just put it with that article that Matt Taibbi wrote. I haven't read it. I'm going to check it out. But Andrew was essentially saying that, look, there is a subsect of the ruling class right now, and it's not just limited to the United States, and that's why many refer to them as globalists, and they try to impose their, Western valued worldview, whether it comes to social issues or the weaponization of social issues for foreign policy ends, on the masses of the global population to exert, political victories. And that's kind of what we've seen unfold with this Ukraine situation. And it's also manifested in other ways recently. I mean, we've seen the likes of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez rise up in the ranks of the Democratic Party on anti-war messaging, who are now saying that they support sanctioning some of the poorest people in the world because these poor people do not adhere to Western values of LGBT norms. Now, you can agree with that or disagree with that, and there's a conversation to be had there about that. But at the end of the day, these people don't live in America, and they don't have the same cultural values that we do. So why are you imposing our cultural values on them at the price of these poor people, the poorest people on the planet, now not having the ability to have access to food or construction materials or medical aid, these sorts of things? It's just completely insane. And that's why about a year and a half ago, I tweeted out something. I said, wokeism is the new neoconservatism. It really is. And they're weaponizing it in the same way that they just used to be extremely pro-hawkish in the name of democracy. Now it's being hawkish and being, supportive of sanctions and these sorts of things in the name of being a morally superior person who adheres to woke values.
Well, it's a kind of a McCarthyist sort of worldview in the sense, that is precisely what Matt Taibbi's article was talking about, was that, using these kinds of things to, again, export our sort of colonial mentality to the rest of the world. Speaking of dead monarchs, it goes all the way from, the indigenous people of North America to, the Uyghurs in China. I mean, we look at situations in another part of the world and apply our values to that and say, well, that doesn't fit our mold, so therefore we're sort of given license to impose sanctions or whatever else we're going to do. And again, it's all part of this kind of Western imperialist sort of mentality.
Yeah, it's interesting how the times change. Like that seems to be the only way that they can get young people to support these things. And young people have fallen hook, line, and sinker for this stuff, I think, for the most part, because, I'll talk to people, I'll debate people online that are my age. It seems as though most of the people that I know in my own personal life look at the situation in Ukraine and they say, oh, it's maybe sad, but why are we so involved over there? They understand that there's something weird going on there. But when I talk to people online about this who are my age or younger, the only thing I ever hear is about the claims of moral superiority. It's, the big country Russia's invading the small country Ukraine. There's no actual contextualization of the complex history that's gone on for many years. I would argue you could go all the way back to, Secretary of State Baker in 91 making promises, albeit not in writing. That was who was that at the time? Was that Gorbachev? It was their fault for not getting this.
It was between Gorbachev and Yeltsin, but yeah, it was Mikhail Gorbachev was the Russian.
Yeah, I think I remember. I was watching the Putin Oliver Stone interviews a few weeks ago, and Putin was actually talking about that, and I'd never heard him talk about that. And he was actually blaming. I think in the interview he blamed Gorbachev, and he was like, when you're dealing with these complex geopolitical matters, you have to get this stuff in writing, and he didn't get it in writing. Mm-hmm. That being said, they did promise they wouldn't extend NATO 1 inch east of Germany, and they've done that 14 times now. And they want to do it a 15th, 16th, and 17th time with, Finland, Sweden, and Ukraine, respectively. And that's in large part what set off all this, what's going on in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, Chris Hedges, when he was on the show a few months back, he the first thing he said when the subject of the war in Ukraine came up, he said, look, I absolutely condemn Russia an invasion of another sovereign country is illegal under, but he also went into the, if someone's holding a gun to your head, what are you supposed to do? Wait until they pull the trigger? And so there's this, there's a lot of background. I don't know if you saw that Roger Waters interview with that guy from CNN.
Oh, yeah.
Where he just he said, bollocks, you need to go and read a few books. I loved him for that. But, the background of the story and the Oliver Stone films are fantastic for that. And no wonder you can't find those online either. I mean, Ukraine on Fire is this phenomenal piece of work, but it's, and you must have this all the time. I mean, you've been on Fox News, you've been on Tucker, so of course you're a Trump supporter, you're a MAGA person, you're a fascist, right? What are you doing?
Yeah, no, I mean, the amount of I got a lot of really positive messages and positive emails from people I haven't heard from in a while, new people that haven't ever heard of me when I went on Tucker, but the amount of messages I got that were saying like, oh, he's a Trump fascist now. I mean, it was crazy. And I think it came from mostly people who just haven't been following what's going on. I mean, you can't really argue. I mean, sure, some of the stuff I was saying on the show, I think it was all true 100%. I wasn't being hyperbolic at all.
I didn't.
But, some of the stuff I was saying on the show, it's like, this is true. They're actually trying to strip away our freedom of speech right now. I am a living testimony of that. Big tech and the government are colluding to make this happen, and they're actually succeeding. And it's very scary to witness that. And not only that, but I think the more fundamental question here, and what I wanted to strike at that in that interview, is that I truly see what the Biden administration is doing right now, and what whatever you want to call them, I call them globalists because I think that's a fitting term. Andrew Karibko agrees with me. They are unique. They are more unique than just simply a capitalist or an imperialist, and many of them don't even identify as these sorts of things. But they are trying to unravel our country and what it means to be an American. We have a diverse country. It's ethnically diverse, religiously diverse, very culturally diverse, and that's beautiful. But it was founded on a set of principles, in my view. That's what I would argue our country was founded upon. And there's a set of people right now who are not only trying to unravel those basic values, but they're trying to tell us that those things are fundamentally anti-American and trying to indoctrinate a generation that that's the case. And that's going to have real ramifications for our country in the future, especially at a time of great peril like this. Will the next generation of Americans feel like picking up the pieces of our country and rebuilding this country like they've done in previous generations now that they don't really have anything tying them to the national reality? That's a question that needs to be asked, and something that I bring up quite a bit on my show, and a conversation that needs to be had.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it's as I've said a number of times, it's wonderful that there's someone like yourself, for example, who is of the younger generation that gets it, and I just hope that there's more of them to come. So anyway, we'll go to a couple of promos here, and we'll be back in just about 2 minutes. Stay tuned for Jackson Hinkle.
Hi, my name is Bartek Stardai, the Director of Housing for the City of Kingston. The entire city is getting a new zoning code, and the second draft has been released. Once this zoning code is adopted, it will impact all development in Kingston for decades to come. The code addresses housing affordability, walkability, open space, historic preservation, street design, and more. A public comment period on the second draft is now open until September 30th. This is your final opportunity to provide feedback and impact the third and final draft of the zoning code that will be released later this fall. Learn more when you click the Kingston Forward Citywide Rezoning button at engagekingston.com.
Radio Kingston.
Many voices.
Many voices.
Many voices.
One community.
Hi, this is Dan Reinhardt. Join me every Monday night at 7 p.m. for Sport Talk here at Radio Kingston. For 42 years, we have interviewed national and local sports figures, getting the pulse of what is happening in the world of sports. We also connect with the sports authors and writers covering the national and local sports scene for a flavor a little different than your regular sports show. So join me every Monday night at 7 p.m. right here at Radio Kingston, AM 1490, FM 107.9, and anytime at radiokingston.org.
And we're back on the radio with my special guest, Jackson Hinkle, who's joining me from his home in beautiful, where do you live? Downtown LA? Is that where you live?
Downtown LA.
I love downtown
Beautiful
LA.
downtown LA.
It's the coolest part of this. I remember at one point I was going to move, I was thinking about moving there, and I was looking around. This is like 25 years ago. And I thought, wow, this could be a cool neighborhood, you know?
It's getting better. It's getting better. I think when I was younger, I used to come up here a lot. I didn't live far away, about an hour away. And it's gotten a lot better. There's a lot of cool restaurants and stuff that are opening up. There's fun stuff to do. But it's a fun place to live.
I remember I was looking at spaces, because my day job is I'm a record producer, actually, and I have my own recording studio, and I was looking for a space to use as a studio, and I was talking to a realtor, and they said, oh, you have to come and look at this building. And it was this old bank building downtown, and it was like something out of Metropolis, Fritz Lang movie. Yeah, it had this incredible intercom system that they used to use with all these pipes where they were. It was all like when you go to the bank and you put the thing in the thing, it goes over to the drive-through tellers. It was like a whole what's that word? Anyways, the whole system was absolutely phenomenal. It was just something. Anyway,
the old building I used to live in for like a year and a half, it was a bank, and it had that stuff. It was
might have been the same building. Who knows?
Henry Hellman, I think, was the guy who made that building. He's like an old LA contractor guy. But there's a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of history in this town that people aren't aware of, and I love that more than anything, is learning about all the history.
Yeah, I mean it's people don't realize that downtown LA used to be quite the happening scene. Back in the 30s and 40s. I mean, they had LA had the world's best streetcar system at one point.
And there's a lot of political history here too. Like I recently joined the Jonathan Club, which is just like a social club in LA. Lots of business guys are in it. And I was walking around the club. They have a big building in downtown, and it was my first time in, and I was like looking at all these photos, and I'm like, that's this presidential candidate. That's Ronald Reagan. And they're like, yeah, like it started out of a presidential campaign, and basically they all locked down in LA after the campaign ended. I forget which candidate it was. I don't think he won that year, but I think the guy ended up becoming president. I forget who it was, they said, but there's just so much history here. Just like with all the subjects we talk about, the people choose to avoid the history, but that's the most important part to all these discussions we have today.
Let's talk just a little bit more about the situation with Ukraine, because that's such a big issue right now. If you were to make a prediction, where do you see things, and say, by the old man winter's coming? And the Russians know that General Winter is always on their side. I mean...
Yes. I mean, like you said earlier, though, war always comes with unexpected events, right? Any war. But, I mean, yeah, you're right. Anyone who knows their history about Russian military ventures knows it's a bad idea to fight Russia in the midst of winter. And the West right now is probably... in the worst position that they could be to try and attempt something like this, to continue this for the months throughout winter and throughout the economic crisis that's going to ensue after winter hits. Because, to put it bluntly, you have arms reserves that are drying up right now all across the EU, and to a lesser extent in the United States. Arms that would be flowing to Ukraine they're gonna be in shorter supply in the coming months. Men, of course, are going to, high skilled men that are of NATO standard for Ukraine. Troops, infantry are going to be in shorter supply. Ukraine still has men, but as far as well-trained men, that's going to be a question. And of course, Europe, the biggest problem is Europe is about to go through an energy crisis, the likes of which we've probably never seen before in human history. They have almost poetically sanctioned so much that they have sanctioned themselves into what is going to be far worse than 2008, an economic crisis that's going to be here for years and years to come. And Europe is not going to be able to fix this issue after one winter. It's going to be multiple winters that they have to deal with this. So you have supply issues, you have the economic crisis. Another supply issue is NATO right now can't, for some reason, get winter grade materials and clothing and military garb to the Ukrainian troops. This is another issue. All of this being said, it looks like it's going to be bad for Ukraine and bad for the collective West this winter. We'll see how Russia responds and how far they push. That's going to be the question. But I don't think that anyone's going to expect this to last too much longer than winter. Even Zelensky's come out and said multiple times that he wants this to wrap up by winter. We'll see what happens. I've been surprised many times throughout the entirety of this war, but I don't see, as we get closer to these winter months, it going well for Ukraine.
I mean, to be somewhat cynical and skeptical about the reality of what's going on, and I do sort of paraphrase our Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. My view is that the intention is to bog Russia down. Hence this constant influx of weaponry into Ukraine. It's just going to turn it into a quagmire. They're trying to create, in my view, they're trying to create another Afghanistan for Russia to keep it tied down so that then they can pivot to Asia and we can start messing with China instead. That's how I see what's going on, and I think there are other people who share that view pretty strongly.
Yes. I mean, I think you're 100% right there. You can look back to, leaked cables from the early 2000s of individuals like William Burns, who's now the head of the CIA, formerly, he was an ambassador to Russia, I think, back then, or I think he was ambassador to Russia.
I don't remember exactly, but
he was saying that exact thing in those leaked documents that were exposed by WikiLeaks. He was saying, we want to draw Russia into this civil war in the Donbass and destabilize them. That was the gist of the message, and it sounded a lot like the intent of what you brought up, Afghanistan, striking at the soft underbelly of the Soviet Union by luring them into Afghanistan. It was the same exact thing. So we'll see, though. My only reservation I'd have with an analysis that arrives at, this is going to be a quagmire for Russia, is that Russia, the ball is in their court. I mean, they currently have 50,000 plus troops in the east that are doing military training with China and several other nations. The amount of troops deployed and assets deployed to Ukraine right now is it is small compared to what they could actually mobilize. That's why they call it a special military operation. People contest that label of what's going on in Ukraine, call it a war, call it whatever. But the reason why Russia at the end of the day is calling it that is because there is going to be, it's the material reality of the situation, but also there's going to be less blowback. If you call it something like that, and maybe there's some losses and you don't mobilize as many men, it's not really, in their eyes, a war. And if you listen to the Russian people, I mean, most of the Russian people, when you hear them interviewed on the streets, they say things like, I don't really know anyone who's actually fighting in Ukraine right now. I don't know any Russians who've been sent over there or participating in the war effort. That could all change if Russia decides, and they could easily bring an end to this, I think, in pretty short time if they took that political step. But I don't think Putin wants to take that step.
Scott Ritter makes a very valid point, and I think Brian New Atlas Brian reflects this. The difference is that you've got Ukrainian troops who are generally not very well. I mean, they've used up all their best people already. I mean, they've all the well-trained officers and so forth are effectively gone. So you've got new recruits, whereas what Russia's doing is rotating. So you're actually getting personnel rotating in and out of an actual combat situation. I mean, that's the best training you could possibly get from a military point of view. So they're they're constantly rotating their troops in and out. So they're actually getting live fire training as they go, which is invaluable. I mean, I know it's a bit heartless to talk about it in those terms, but that is the reality, So anyway,
and that's, I mean, it's true. It is dark to talk about war in these terms of just like straight up what is the strategy here, who's benefiting. But I mean, it's the truth. And Russia is unique in that position because there's really there's been no major ground wars of major powers have fought in recent years. And this is something that Colonel Douglas McGregor brings up quite a bit too. I mean, yes. Russia, of course, was launching, I think at its peak, like 120 daily air sorties in Syria. So they have a lot of experience when it comes to air power and their air force, and they are exhibiting that in Ukraine. But Air Force doesn't mean a whole lot. I mean, it means something, but it doesn't mean a whole lot when you've got Ukraine who's supplying an endless supply of men to fight. And Russia seems a bit hesitant to stage their infantry in any sort of bold manner. And I think that's what we saw unfold in Kharkiv. Russia didn't want to take losses. They didn't think it was worth it. Like, Alexander Mercurius brought up, they were probably thinking about withdrawing from Izium in the Kharkov region for quite some time. They definitely didn't think it was strategically reasonable to lose thousands of men in fighting for that region when they didn't even know if they wanted it. But now you see Russia going in today. I'm sure you've seen it's lights out in Ukraine right now. I mean, I'm seeing reports that, and who knows if this is the case. Well, I'm sure we'll get more valid information in due time, but I'm seeing reports that 50% of and this is from a Ukrainian source, Russia has destroyed 50% of Ukraine's energy infrastructure in 2.3 hours. So they are responding to this Kharkov offensive, and I don't think it's because the Kharkov offensive really posed any substantial threat to the overall Russian war effort. I think it is primarily because Putin cares about his view, how he is viewed by other world leaders in Mexico, in Turkey, in India, China. And this was a substantial propaganda blow to the Russian war effort, the fact that they lost all this land, 2,000 square kilometers, and now they are responding not in kind. They are responding with a massive amount of, air-based artillery, and they're taking out a lot of Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which is something that, they've said that they didn't want to do because this is going to impact civilians now.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I just read somewhere that the Russians who are in control of the Zaporozhye nuclear plant, which keeps getting, I love it when there's a debate about who's shelling that place. And then, there's like someone shows a picture of a 150 millimeter howitzer shell. And you're like, well, that's a NATO weapon. So, unless the Russians are using that caliber and that type of weapon, it's pretty obvious who's shooting live ammunition at a nuclear power plant. But I think they just shut down the last reactor. So that's a bunch of electricity that's not going to be going anywhere. Yeah.
I think I could be 100% wrong about this, but I remember when I was covering it, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant news daily, I think I remember reading, I know it's the largest power plant in Europe, but I think I remember reading it supplies Ukraine with like 60% of their energy.
I mean, it's incredible that the Russians even kept the thing running. I mean, what does that say about their, somebody, it's either, I don't know his actual name, Earl Grey. That's how he goes.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
I don't know if it was him or somebody else, but they were saying, look, we have to remember that Ukrainians and Russians, really, they're brothers. the Russians aren't looking at the Ukrainians as their arch enemies, the way, say, Palestinians look at, Zionist settlers in the Gaza or something. It's there is this kinship, and it's like you can see that Russia is being very careful not to demolish all the infrastructure, for example, because how are you gonna have public support when you destroy people's towns and villages and livelihoods? It makes no sense, right? So,
yeah, and one of the things that I didn't entirely understand at the start of the war, but my friend Haas of the Infrared Show, he's another great guy you should check out. He was pointing out was like, this is still very much like a war of public perception in Ukraine. I mean, Putin needs to, in the first days of the war, I looked at the situation and I was like, well, obviously no Ukrainians are going to be happy about this. But actually, I mean, a lot of them have welcomed the Russians and welcomed them as liberators and given them their trust. And now we've seen that trust broken amongst the population of Kharkiv and Izium. And there's going to be reprisals in those cities amongst, collaborators of the Russians. And that's going to be...
It's already happening. I mean, I've seen reports of pretty atrocious things being done.
It's going to be, it's terrible, I'm sure. But this now leads us to the question of, well, how are other cities going to respond? When the Russians move in, what's going to happen when Russians try to move into Mykolaiv and Odessa? This is going to change the atmosphere amongst the people of Ukraine. And this too, they're taking this very, very big step of, for the first time, targeting civilian infrastructure. What's going to be the response to that? I don't know. I mean, it's interesting to look at this. As a neutral observer, I can't say. I'm just looking at this and seeing that a lot of civilians are going to be impacted by this.
Yeah, and I think it's important to always remain clear that we're not picking sides here. I know Ukrainian people. I feel bad. Obviously, I empathize with people who are caught in the middle of any conflict like that. My heart goes out to anyone in that situation. But as John Pilger says, it's a propaganda war. It's a war of, I just need to do this one little thing here. This is our legal disclaimer. I have to run it right at the top of the hour, so.
From our studio in Midtown, this is Radio Kingston, WKNY, AM 1490, FM 1079, Kingston, New York.
There we go. We know what radio station you're listening to. So, did you watch Putin's speech, the big speech the other day?
I did.
What was your takeaway from that?
My takeaway from that was that Putin, he spoke at the Eastern Economic Forum, and he outlined some pretty indisputable, that's the correct word, points that I think were bared out by the trade deals, the billions of dollars in trade deals that were wrapped up in after the end of the Eastern Economic Forum. So basically, Putin went out, and he said, essentially, the global the global opinion on the U.S. global dollar reserve is in decline. People don't trust it anymore. We're going to be moving forward with alternative currencies, like the ruble, for example, which is the top performing currency of the year. And BRICS, the currently 5-nation coalition made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is working to try and replace a lot of these Western trade relationships with countries in Africa, the Middle East, Asia, for example. And I think that they're doing a pretty good job of arguing this case because all these nations are moving closer and closer to Russia and to China. And they understand that the West really presents them with no opportunity. As sad as that is, someone who lives in the West, I understand that we are going to be impacted negatively as a result of this and our decline in the global stature. And Russia and China, I'm sure it's already happening, are going to help these countries industrialize and develop. That's something that we should be doing. And we're letting Russia and China take up these opportunities, and they're going to benefit immensely. They're commodities producers, and the rest of the world sees exactly what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, another article that came out on Substack recently, Chris Hedges, it's called Permanent War. He outlines this sort of basic notion that our country is now just in a perpetual state of war. I mean, you're 22 years old, so you were born a year after September 11th, 9/11, which is the anniversary today of which we speak. And it's been all war all the time ever since. I mean, it's, there's not been a day go by where America has not been engaged in some conflict somewhere since 9/11. And, it just reflects this sort of idea that that's about the only economy we've got left,
It's sad to see. I had Ron Paul on my show not too long ago, and it was about the time when we started seeing some stories that Russia's gonna they just finished up buying up a bunch of gold reserves in their central bank, and they're flirting with the idea of attaching the ruble to a new gold standard.
Which is why they bombed Gaddafi into oblivion, by the way.
Exactly. And what he made the point of is that in previous generations of political leadership in the United States, they could feasibly do this. If a country was posing a substantial threat to the unipolar world order, well, we'll just go in and we will depose their leader violently. We'll launch a coup. We'll do whatever needs to be done and make sure that we squash that effort. Russia and China, as he put it, pose a threat to that. And he said, I don't know how long it's going to be until we see the complete collapse of the unipolar American hegemonic order in the U.S. empire as a whole. But it's happening. And we are in the midst of this multipolar world where other nations are rising up. Other economies are forming as real substantive alternatives. And I think that's the most interesting part of all. I mean, the war in Ukraine is surface level stuff. The real underpinnings of this great feud between China, Russia, and the United States and the West right now is based upon commodities producers who prioritize the worldview of the need for industrialization and development over those in the West who favor degrowth, deindustrialization, and control of, the world empire building through military might. The U.S. can't do that to Russia and China.
Well, that's an interesting way to segue and quote pivot to China. Which have you seen John Pilger's film, The Coming War on China?
I haven't. I'll have to check it out.
It's very good. I mean, it's on par with Oliver Stone's film in many ways. He talks about he devotes quite a good bit of time talking about the Solomon Islands.
Okay.
In the South Seas, and the whole issue of the Bikini Islands being used as nuclear test sites ever since about 1947. I think they dropped about 58 nuclear warheads and basically used the people of those islands as guinea pigs. And to this day, it's still an ongoing thing. And John is he's not it's not that he's not critical of China. But what he is critical of is why on earth would anyone be saber rattling with countries that have nuclear capabilities, including China. This is something that I have a young friend he's only 15 years old, and he wakes up in nightmares every day thinking about, like, are we going to have is this World War III, or is it going to be mushroom clouds going off, like,
Yeah, I mean, China is a unique threat to the United States, obviously. And I say threat loosely. I mean, it's a threat to those in power in the United States, the warhawks, because its population is 3 to 4 times the size of ours. And eventually its economy will be at that level. It'll be far larger than the United States is. Mm-hmm. China has focused so heavily on growth and development and lifting people out of poverty, the vision of economic prosperity that is championed by people. And again, I have many critiques of China. They're culturally very different than the United States, but you have to give credit where credit is due. Xi Jinping has helped lift 40 million people out of poverty. I mean, not just him, but China as a whole. Over the past, or or no, sorry, it's 800 million people, I believe, out of poverty over the past 40 years.
Yeah,
That's
there is effectively no, like, the kind of thing you could see if you walked 4 blocks down the street in LA, or if I walk right outside on the main Broadway,
anywhere
in America.
It's
like, you don't have that level of poverty and financial disparity in China. No.
And that's the threat. That's the threat that they pose to the United States, is they have that. They have control of significant commodities production. They do trade with most of the world now. They've replaced the United States as pretty much the top global trade partner. And the U.S. is very worried about that. And I forget who said it, but they said an empire is most dangerous in its dawn and in its demise. And that's what we're going through right now, is the demise of our empire. And it's the leaders of it are lashing out left and right at whoever is perceived as the biggest threat at the time. Right now, it might be Russia, but everything is being guided up to a heated war with China. And it's going to make the whole Russia situation, I'm sure John Pilger discusses this, look like minutia, compared to what is eventually going to go down with China.
Yeah, I mean, you have, the other thing that John talked about quite a bit is how people don't understand how many military bases there are surrounding China. I think it's like about 40 military bases all around the country. So, how is a country supposed to respond to that? I mean, what would be America's response, for example? I mean, how would we deal with military Russian, look what happened in the Cuban Missile Crisis. They put some nuclear missiles in Cuba and, we haven't forgiven them. It's like 60 something years later. We're still mad at the Cubans about it,
Or if China, I mean, the Taiwan situation is crazy enough as is. I mean, like, if, there are secessionist efforts in Hawaii, what if China started to arm and train those secessionist leaders in Hawaii and started setting up military bases there and sending, Communist Party of China delegations to meet with those secessionist leaders and recognize it? Like, it's completely insane what we're doing in Taiwan right now. That's the equivalent, of course. And of course, that's going to enrage a country. And of course, that's going to cause them to take decisive action in a time of, we would see otherwise, peace and slow integration of Taiwan into mainland China.
Is it, Mao Zedong had a vision back in 1947, 48, somewhere around there. And he actually sent letters to all the heads of government of the United States. And he had this vision. He said, we can be the builders, and exactly what has occurred now with China was Mao's vision 70 odd years ago, where China would build it and America would distribute it, and it would be this partnership. And why do we have to go through all this shit to get there in the first place? It's just like so frustrating.
It's frustrating. I mean, like, if one of my favorite American minds is Henry Carey. He was Abraham Lincoln's economic advisor, and he envisioned a world in which great industrial powers would work together, just like what you just said, like what Mao envisioned, and building a prosperous world where you have these great powers that can produce great things and help other countries, lift their masses and industrialize. Obviously, we're not in that world right now. Henry Carey's vision didn't come true, but imagine if it did.
Well, what do you think's behind this? I mean, we sort of hit on it briefly. What do you think's behind this kind of American sense of exceptionalism and sort of, yes, but we're so much better than that. And we're sort of bringing, if it wasn't for us, I mean, God, I remember after 9/11, like, you couldn't get away from American flags just everywhere. And it was this overall sense, even with relatively sane, sensible people, that America was this beacon of freedom and democracy, and without it, the world would be back in the dark ages.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that the problem is even bigger than that now, based upon what we're seeing. It sounds tinfoil hatty, it sounds conspiratorial, but there are a subsect of leaders right now in the West that are in the highest positions of all. You look at the World Economic Forum, you look at people like Klaus Schwab, you look at individuals like Henry Kissinger, who still exert a great deal of influence and sway over the deep state, the military industrial complex. These people believe wholeheartedly, and they're open about this, they write about this, in a worldview that embodies the principles of Thomas Malthus. And it's a Malthusian worldview that honestly thinks that the world has a carrying capacity of 1 billion people, and that we need to focus on getting to that point, or else we're not going to have a suitable world for future generations, however they rationalize it. But that process of getting there, as we're seeing in Europe right now, as they push this green energy demand into winter, and they're not going to work with Russian energy anymore. They're not going to work with fossil fuels anymore. They're not going to reopen their coal plants or their nuclear plants, anything like that, has devastating impacts on average civilians. But that's just the thing. I think that these Western leaders, whether they look at workers in China or working people in Zimbabwe or working people in the United States, they kind of view all of these people as just a meaningless population, a population that is just there. In the United States, it's the service economy, and they can do without them. They can replace them with machines, whatever. And that's the exceptional nature I see today that's taking shape, that's so frightening to me, is the fact that they just frankly don't care about our populations, about the global population. They don't care. It's a matter of preserving their worldview for themselves and those in power. And that's the extent of it.
Yeah. Well, I won't paraphrase Roger Waters when his opinion was, but he, I'll expunge the expletives, the curse words out of what he said. But essentially he said, these people do not give a about you. They don't. I read somewhere recently that there are calculations that the Pentagon has made that if a limited nuclear war was to occur, it's not a matter of whether or not it would be acceptable. It's like there are calculations, and there's a number, roughly 80 million people, that the Pentagon has said, if there was a limited nuclear war, say in eastern Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, that roughly about 80 million people would die. And that is an acceptable number for the Pentagon. I mean, think about that. Like, it's just, that's insanity. Those people are insane. And that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, it is insane, but it's like the truth, and you talk to an average person that might not follow this stuff all that closely, or might even worse, believe what's being said about, the situation in Ukraine, or might believe whatever Joe Biden and Antony Blinken are purporting to be the truth about any foreign dispute. And they hear something like this, and it just doesn't even register as something that could be true. And that's the scariest part of all, is that so many people have become indoctrinated with this worldview that like everything's okay and everything will be okay. And, there's not a massive project underway to achieve these goals. But as you just put it, and as we just discussed with Henry Kissinger and his writings, and this is a very real thing, though they see the world as a place that doesn't need so many of the global population that we currently have to continue operating. That was kind of also the worldview behind the idea of securing the Eurasian heartland, which was Mackinder and Brzezinski's worldview that, controlling Eurasia is the path to global domination. And that's why there's so much fighting over this Belt and Road Initiative that China's putting forward right now, and why there's so many great efforts to stop it. Because if China can succeed with this Belt and Road Initiative, that's a dead end for the United States and for the collective West to ever have control over, these rural regions in Eastern Asia, Central Asia. You talk about places like we talked about, you know, Xinjiang and the Uyghurs earlier on in this episode. The reason why anyone in America even knows about that, and you know, the claims of what is going on there, and the debate around that, is because of the Belt and Road Initiative and the economic threat it poses to the United States.
And that's the nature of propaganda. Unfortunately, the nature of it is to create a mindset amongst the population that makes unacceptable acceptable. You know, if you go back and study, for example, the Third Reich and the methods that the Nazis used on their own population, you know, you eventually, through these various methods, create an environment where things that would be unimaginable become imaginable. You know, to the point where, it was about a month and a half ago, I don't know how it happened. Something showed up on my feed, and it was in New York City, because I live, you know, New York's just down the road. The you know, in event of a nuclear attack, here's what to do: go inside your brownstone. Don't go outside.
Yeah.
Stay inside. And God, I don't know what they were. That was just, and it was such a banal thing. It just sort of appeared as if it was just sort of, you know,
no big deal.
By the way, we're having you know, and the sad part is in all of this conversation, there's no room for pressing issues. I mean, I know that when you were very relatively young, you were concerned about the environment, and I'm sure you still are. But there's no room for a conversation about, you know, any of these sort of pressing issues when we're being brainwashed into.
No, that's, I mean, not the environment necessarily, but like
anything.
Keeping food on your table and a roof over your head are the most pressing issues to Americans. Making sure that they have enough money to sustain life for them and their family. I mean, that's the quintessential issue that most Americans are faced with at this moment in time, when like over 50% of our country, maybe a lot more than that. I haven't read the recent statistics. I'm sure it's gotten worse since I last checked it, but over 50% of our country can't afford a $500 unexpected bill.
Right.
You know, why would anyone ever, you know, no one's begging the United States to send $70 billion over to Ukraine, or to completely drain out our reserves of you know, missiles to send to Taiwan. No one would ever want anything like that. No one does want anything like that. We want our politicians to focus on us. You're 100% right.
Well, I think your analysis is pretty astute in the sense that, and you know, I'll tell you sort of a little metaphor or whatever. When I was campaigning for Bernie back in 2016, you know, you get on the phone, you do phone banking stuff. Did you? I don't know if you did any of that stuff, but I did plenty of it, door to door and this and that. And it was interesting because, like, you know, you're given a phone list of people that are potential, you know, voters that are going to be voting Democrat. And, you know, you're on the phone and I'm Malcolm. I'm calling on behalf of Bernie Sanders, and I'm not even asking to vote for Bernie. I just want to make sure you get out and vote. That was the gist of it. And very often, if I got, you know, you get people hang up, and then you get somebody who's like, "You're calling the wrong house, and we're voting for Hillary." They'd be very hostile. The people that were the Hillary supporters were the most hostile. But you get like every now and then I get like somebody out in like West Virginia who's, you know, everybody in our house is Republicans. We're all voting for Donald Trump because, you know, he knows how to run business and we love that. But if I was voting for, if Bernie was a Republican, I'd vote for him too. You know, like there was that sort of affinity there that this guy is not just another schmuck who's going to go and do his thing in D.C. and make a bajillion dollars in the process, you know? So I
think Jimmy Dore should run for president.
I thought he was going to, isn't he?
He might. I had dinner with him last week, and
I thought I saw something where there was a Jimmy Dore for president.
We're trying to get him to run. I think he'd be great.
I'm in.
You know, he didn't even know this. There was a poll that was run on his name like
That's
2
probably
weeks
what I
ago,
saw. Yeah.
and 1 in 3 Americans know who Jimmy Dore is. That's crazy. I thought it was going to be like 8% of America knew who he was or something. apparently going on Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan and Russell Brand shows as much as he does has kind of opened up his audience significantly. And YouTube, of course, his YouTube show, his comedy career. But I think he should run for president. And, you know, anyone who's listening right now, if you think Jimmy Dore should run for president, message him, email him, write him a letter, do whatever you think if you think he should run too. I'm not saying that you should. But, you know, if you like him, I think that he's a no BS sort of guy. And I think he'd unite a lot of Americans. I think he'd fix a lot of the problems we have right now. And God, I'm trying my best to get him to run.
Okay, well, you tell him from me that I'll vote for him too. Trying to get him on this show. I'm trying to get him on this show, but I don't know. He's a busy guy, man. Holy shit. But, you know, you're onto something there because, you know, because Jimmy also, you know, I think people will come to you if you keep on saying what you really feel is the right thing to say and stop worrying about who's going to, you know, who's going to be offended by me going on this TV show or that TV show or supporting this person. Oh, you're not like in the box, so to speak. And I think that's his appeal and certainly yours as well, you know, so.
Yeah, I think that's what we need right now. I mean, if you're not a 7-figure salary CNN reporter, you can see the world more clearly. And I think that's where we all do our best, you know?
Well, here's a question of if Jimmy were to run, how would he be independent? Because I couldn't see him running as a Democrat. And I certainly...
No, he definitely wouldn't run as a Democrat. I think he'd run with the third party, the People's Party. And they formed out of the Bernie Sanders campaign, actually. They're very interesting. But they've never run any candidates before, and they don't have they have a national infrastructure, but I mean, it would kind of be formed out of the campaign. In all honesty, it would be expanded upon in that capacity. But I mean, he wouldn't run with the Republicans. He wouldn't run with the Democrats. I think the most recent poll had it at like 65% of Americans would consider voting for a third party right now. But like, we need that vanguard candidate. We need that vanguard coalition. And it's going to be made up of Republicans and Democratic voters and independent voters and whatnot. But who's going to be the person that has the name recognition, has the appeal, all that sort of stuff that can actually do it? There's not a lot of people who can. And there's not a lot of people who can and would also do it in a third party because of the low likelihood you have of actually
getting on the ballot,
getting a chip of the votes, but he's considering it.
Well, you know, Chris Hedges, when we were talking, when he was on the show, you know, because he used to be a speechwriter for Ralph Nader. And, you know, Ralph's been sort of relegated to the dustbins of American political history. Although, you know, when you think about someone who's done more for this country, he was the guy who decided we should all be wearing seatbelts. I mean, he's saved millions and millions and millions of lives, yet he's treated as a sort of pariah from everybody. But Chris was saying that when Bernie was at his peak, and it was obvious that he wasn't going to get anywhere because the Democratic Party was, you know, going to do him royally, refraining from the profanity that I would normally use. He had said to Bernie, why don't you go independent? You've got all of these millions and millions of people. You've got this infrastructure. You've got this financial ability to raise millions of dollars, you know, and Bernie's response, as Chris said, was, I don't want to be the next Ralph Nader. You know, I'd rather be part of I want to be I want to be, you know, part of the club. I'm not going to sacrifice.
So sad.
And that's sad. So we got to go to a quick break. And while we're at the quick break, I'm going to dial up a bit of music. Okay? You asked for some Vietnam era stuff, so I'll find you something.
Sounds good.
Okay. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Marina Van Zwielen from the Bart Clemente Course for the Humanities. We're accepting applications for our 2022 fall program. The course is a 3-credit college-level introduction to the humanities, U.S. history, philosophy, literature, art history, and writing. Students attend completely free which includes tuition and books. The Clemente application is free, open to anyone 16 and older from a low-income household who foresees financial or personal difficulty applying to colleges or jobs and is motivated and enthusiastic. Classes will meet on Zoom every Tuesday and Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. from October 6th through late January. Deadline to apply is September 30th. To get more information or to apply, visit clemente.bard.edu.
Radio Kingston.
Muchas voces.
Muchas voces.
Muchas voces.
Una comunidad.
Hola amigues, I am Mariel Fiori. Every Monday through Friday morning from 10 to 11 a.m. we have La Voz con Mariel Fiori here at Radio Kingston. It's an inspiring hour of interviews, commentary, good music, current issues and information. Knowledge is power. And it's all en español. La Voz with Mariel Fiori. Every weekday morning from 10 to 11 a.m. Here on Radio Kingston, AM 1490, FM 1079, or anytime at radiokingston.org.
You're listening to The Long Way Round, and my guest tonight is none other than Jackson Hinkle. And Jackson, it's amazing how quickly the time does go by when you start talking about stuff. It's always incredible to me when we start the show and I'm like, oh, 2 hours, what are you going to do? And the next thing you know, it's like, time's gone by. You know, before I forget, I wanted to ask you specifically about a couple things. What are your platforms that you, apart from YouTube, where can people find you?
Yeah, so apart from YouTube, you can find me on Rumble, RUMBLE, which is a YouTube alternative, and it's a great platform. It's a free speech alternative to YouTube, and if you look up my name, Jackson Hinkle, it'll come up there. Twitter as well, I use daily, and that's pretty much it. I don't really use Facebook. I don't use Instagram, but yeah, YouTube, Rumble, and Twitter are my main platforms.
Okay, because I guess I'm seeing you. And your show is called The Dive with Jackson Hinkle. I want people in the audience to know that. So if you just put in The Dive with Jackson Hinkle on your Google search, it'll come up and they'll find it, right?
Yes.
And my other question to you is who are some of your top sources for information? Because one of the conversations I had with Roger Waters was there's like mainstream media, forget it. It's just no point in watching that. It's just junk. But we also have to be very careful because there's a lot of information on the internet. You have to use your own filters. So with that in mind, where do you go on a daily basis?
It kind of depends by the issue. Like there's some, I think when it comes to issues of war and foreign policy, I think antiwar.com is great. Scott Horton, the Libertarian Institute, is great. When it comes to the situation in Ukraine, I honestly do go to RT for a lot of my news. Not all of it, and I always double check it because as we've seen recently this week, they don't get everything right. But RT is good for the Ukraine news and energy news as it relates to Europe. Anything related to Wall Street, I usually go to Wall Street on Parade. They're a great source for that. When they start delving into domestic political issues, I tend to disagree with them. And when it comes to domestic political issues, I usually go to Robert Barnes. Robert Barnes is a great resource. He is he's a very accomplished attorney in the United States. He's represented people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Covington kids, Alex Jones. I think he's even involved. He was involved in the Donald Trump effort to pardon Julian Assange and Edward Snowden. He's a very accomplished guy and very, he stays up to date with a lot of the domestic news. So those are all great resources. And I pick and choose what I look at throughout the day to inform my content and my analysis that I synthesize on my show nightly.
Well, one of the phenomenal things, and I'm one of my flags that I carry as high as I can is Julian Assange, that for me and for many people, his case is a signifying case in the sense that he represents the best of journalism, and I think it's not unreasonable to say that if they can get away with it with him, it's kind of the death of journalism in many ways, because it's sending that message that, look, as my departed friend Art Neville used to say, it's freedom of speech as long as you don't say too much.
I like that.
It's
the truth, though. It's the truth. I mean, he's a non-U.S. citizen. Julian is committed no acts of criminality in the United States. He, I would argue, didn't commit any criminal acts to begin with at all. No more than the New York Times commits when they report on classified leaked documents. And for that, he's facing 175 years in prison, 13 violations of the Espionage Act. It's sickening.
Which
and
is
you're
the
right.
most arcane law on the American law book. I mean, the other thing about WikiLeaks, well, there's two things that I know about WikiLeaks. First of all, they've never had to retract anything they ever published. That I can't think of any other media outlet that can bear that record. And second of all, and there was a study that came out fairly recently that showed that there was never an American life put in jeopardy by anything that WikiLeaks ever published.
Yeah. If there was, it would be on the nightly news every single night talking about how Julian Assange, something he did resulted in an American death. And that would be the biggest tragedy of all. Not the tragedies that Julian Assange exposed in Iraq and Afghanistan with, countless civilian deaths, but that would be the biggest tragedy that the media would focus on. But that didn't happen. You're right. And it's sickening. I mean, the personal aspect of it is sickening with him and his wife and his kids, what they've been put through. And what Julian, of course, has been put through, the mental trauma and the real torture he's been put through. And this is not me being hyperbolic. Niles Meltzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on torture, actually did a in-depth, in-person report on Julian Assange's mental state and found he had been tortured while being held in the Belmarsh prison. But you're right. The ramifications on free speech are endless. It's bad enough already that, we've got this issue of censorship in the United States where they're censoring the president of the United States off of all social media, and therefore they can do that to anyone else in the country now. But this rises to a whole new level. If you even are in another country reporting on the war crimes of the United States and the secrets of the elite, then I would say, the best case scenario you could hope for now is that you end up like Julian Assange. Mm-hmm. Worst case scenario, you don't end up at all.
Well, it's incredible how people have been silenced. I mean, I know a number of people who've been guests on this show. Lee Camp is one of them, America's most censored comedian. Chris Hedges. I mean, they were on RT and they had all of their media. Chris had all of his YouTube. It was just gone. Like 6 years he had a great show on RT called On Contact, all the shows are gone. They're just gone. It's like, that they can do that, so, and, you deal with it, I guess, on a pretty much daily basis, right? Because you're having to tread carefully and stick to your guns, but, even I feel like that, like, geez, maybe I should be careful, like,
Yeah.
get in
and
trouble.
Isn't it funny how they talk about how Russia has like this crazy level of censorship and stuff like that, and they don't have freedom of speech and whatnot. And they do censor journalists there. I mean, that happens, but I would argue most of the time it happens under the guise of trying to stop treasonous actors that are being funded by, CIA cutouts like the National Endowment for Democracy. But I mean, we don't have that in the United States.
Don't you love those names? The National Endowment for Democracy. And it's like, it's the opposite. It's like a fucking oxymoron, for God's sake.
The Patriot Act.
It's just, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
but no, it's that's where we're at now. It's crazy.
And it's imagine how other countries feel when they're having the finger pointed at them and you don't you this, that, and the other. Meanwhile, it's like they're seeing Julian Assange and they're like, wait, like how can you point the finger at us and call us whatever you want to call us when this guy's sitting there and this is a crime against humanity. We're going to run out of time pretty quick. Shall I play another track?
Yeah.
I think you'll enjoy this one. This is one of my favorite artists. The show that's on prior to this show, it's called First Voices Radio. The host is a lovely, beautiful human being named Tiokasin Ghost Horse. He's a Lakota Sioux. And he's been doing his show for 30 years. And he turns me on to a lot of cool stuff, including a guy named John Trudell. John Trudell was a poet, native poet, and this is a track that I love to play on this show as often as possible. It's called Rich Man's War.
Industrial streets, class lines, money talks, turning language to paper pieces. Rich man's war, free man society, raging violent insecurity. Nuclear man, nuclear woman, unclear how to act. Rich man's war, Pershings cruising Europe, America, Russia, governmental nuclear views. Industrial allies cutting the world as though they cannot see blood flowing. Rich man's war. Central America bleeding, wounds same as Palestine and Harlem. 3 Mile Island in El Salvador, Pine Ridge in Belfast. Rich man's war. The poor, starving for food, starving for land, starving for peace, starving for real. Rich man's war, attacking human, attacking being, attacking earth, attacking tomorrow. Rich man's war, thinking of always war, thinking of always war. With machines for ancestors, new unborn generations, chemical umbilical cords are only wiring. In your electrical progress, human lives burnt offerings to the god greed. With lies for ancestors, there is no truth in some futures. Rulers of minds feeding next generation souls to the control machine. Sacrifice ritual for the profit technology. With isolation for ancestors, there's only the present, bought by the credit material uses. Forging chains binding you to destruction. Compliments of your deities, the industrial priest. Face who we really are. Some point we have no choice. Distant star, distant light. In real world we are human being. In shadow of real world we are being human. Neon mask for neon flash. Distant thunder, distant cloud. Passions reign. Drenched in possession, what we take is hard to do. What we do is hard to take. Some ones are crazy, or maybe we take turns. Dreaming about some kind of life, we say it could have been different. But it wasn't, because we weren't. No matter what, it turns out the same. A lot of things we said weren't true. Industrial stories in an electric instant. Neon mask, neon flash, neon flash. Thing is, nihilistic desires. Civilized, gone insane. Didn't imagine it turning like this. Some things start good and go bad. Some things get bad and stay bad. Are we caught in between living a lie or not living at all? Eliminated choices, lost in dreams we let go. Memories we never got to have, something else to think about. Waking up in industrial society, surrounded by angry days. Going through motions of not being. Wanting the best but not expecting it. Surviving paid for in dreams. Feeling like a world alone. Serving God with the devil to pay. Feeling like something in no place. What goes on in hell anyway? Thing is, it has to do with heart. We have to understand what hearts are for before we can get back to heaven or paradise or the power in our mind.
John Trudell, Rich Man's War, speaking for the people who were originally colonized by the Western imperialists for 500 years. They know what they're talking about. Jackson, we're almost out of time, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. I'd love to get you back at some point, and maybe you can say hi to Jimmy next time.
Yeah,
tell him he's got fans that love him, and maybe you can invite me on your show at some point. I'd love to come on.
100%. You guys would also have a great conversation. Thank you so much for having me on. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and yeah, I definitely want to hear more about you as well.
And also, I always like to do a special shout out to our friend Liz Hill. Liz, if you're listening, we love you for making these things happen. Couldn't do it without you. So what's the future looking like? Are you just continue building your brand, as they say, or?
Yeah, I mean, I see my role right now as, it's imperative to expose the contradictions between the ruling elite and the working people of this country. And I think that we are doing a pretty good job of that through the, media conduits that we, run and occupy. But I think my next goal is to create a broader coalition amongst these working class Americans, left, right, Marxist, MAGA, whatever, libertarian, whatever you call yourself. And I am working with people. I want to take over. Are you familiar with the Communist Party of the United States of America, CPUSA?
I am indeed, yes.
Right now, they hold a lot of real estate assets across the United States. And it's a very liberal group of individuals who control that party right now. They're Joe Biden supporters, Kamala Harris supporters. And I want to take over the party. So that's my next venture.
Well, you do look pretty good in a suit and tie. Not everybody does. You look good in a black T-shirt, but you look fine in a tie, and you wear it well. So,
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Maybe if you do that, I'll be voting for you as well. I was going to say, I thought maybe if Jimmy runs, you'd want to be his vice president, but I think he'll go for Ron.
That would be if Jimmy runs, everything I do is put on hold, and I campaign for him. I love that dude. I mean, there's many concerns that a guy like him has to have, running for office. I mean, it's just, you look at what they're doing to Julian Assange. Imagine if Jimmy Dore, anything could happen. I mean, he's a popular guy. Anything could happen. His message would obviously resonate with most Americans. They try to smear him, but it wouldn't work. and that would just blow his campaign up more. Like I would be fearful if I was in his shoes as to, what they're going to try to do to me. But he hasn't given the green light to it yet. I mean, I had dinner with him on Friday night, and he was still like, I want to do it. I don't know if I want to do it. I say, Jimmy, you got to do it. So we'll see. I don't know.
Well, it definitely, according to other people who've run for office that I've known, it really takes a toll on your family. It's also your family you're putting in harm's way because
Ralph Nader said he would be advisor for his campaign.
Oh, that would be awesome. And maybe Chris Hedges can be one of his speech rivals. Not that Jimmy needs help with words. I'm sure he's fine. He doesn't need it.
I think it'd be incredible. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, look, how about why don't I play something to go out with and something optimistic and positive. So, Jackson, thanks a million for being on the show. And I'll get the links to you as soon as they're up. I usually post this to YouTube, and I have a podcast version. I'll send that to you. And
awesome.
In the meantime, thanks a million for being on the show, and you're always welcome back. And
awesome. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Keep up the good fight, my brother.
All right. Peace out.
Talk to you soon. I was Jackson Hinkle, and we're going to go out with, we'll go out with a track called Are You Looking by the Times. Kind of like this idea that we're all under the same cloud. So thanks for joining me on the show. And if the good Lord's willing and the creek don't rise, we'll see you next week.
Psst. Hey, you there, handsome. Are you looking?
Hey, Daddy, who's that lady? She sure is friendly. She speaks to all the men.
Well, Dee Dee, it's a little hard for Daddy to explain to you, honey. And I guess a little hard for you to understand. But she's an awful lot like your mommy.
Is she something special, Daddy?
Well, I guess you can say that. Lady of the night. She's special.
You wear your face to the ground. Have someone put you down. Pick it up and look around. With the clothes you wear and your store-bought hair, you know we'll bring on a stare. Nobody wants you there. Out on the street every day, you give your body away to any Joe who pay. To any Joe who pay. You give yourself away, 'cause you just got to have a good day well spent. see you